Was that supposed to be your great cold open
That
idea?
was my great cold open.
And was it great though? Welcome back to the D3 Datacast, and welcome back to viewers who may have taken the off season off. We are here with our official week one show. It's regular season time, Matt. We're gonna have a lot of fun. We have a ballot to take a look at. You are a top 25 voter. We're gonna talk about how you voted in the top 25 preseason poll. We're gonna talk about some hot takes and some bold predictions for the season. It's gonna be a fun show. We have some hot takes and bold predictions. We have some from our viewers. I'm looking forward to it. Let's just dive right
Yeah,
in.
let's go for it.
Let's go. Let's talk top 25.
All right, let us switch our screen over here so we can show my ballot. I think this is my third year voting in the D3Hoops.com top 25 poll. So every year you got to dive into a preseason ballot. And we don't know a whole lot about teams. We have some teams that have rosters posted, some teams that don't. The D3Hoops.com crew does a good job of soliciting information from some teams that are figured to be nationally relevant, so we get some perspective from the teams about maybe who's returning or who's new. But it's a lot of guesswork on how teams were last year, who's coming back, how good do we think teams are. So this is a look at my ballot. I did post this on my Twitter page, so if you follow at FFTMAG, you maybe have seen this, but I think this gives us an opportunity, Zach, to talk about it a little bit more in depth than I did on social media there. So I'll give my initial thoughts maybe, and then I don't know if you have any questions or anything to talk about, but we can go through that. Starting out at the top, I think about the top five or so, once I was honing in on a ballot here, I kind of felt really good that these were going to be my top five in some order. So that's UW Platteville, that's John Carroll, that's Trine, that's Christopher Newport, and Wash U. And teams that I'm looking for at the top of my ballot in the preseason are teams that were good last year and teams that have a lot of that team returning again. So we know how good they were last year, which in almost all these cases, I think it was, well, I guess John Carroll was first weekend out of the tournament, but they're all tournament teams. Most of them were second weekend or third weekend tournament teams. They got huge chunks of those teams returning. We expect them to be good again. And in John Carroll's case, we know that they were at the top of the rankings most of the season anyway. So I felt really good about those teams, went with that order. I think all the people can make really good arguments for other teams, but as a top five, I felt really good about that group there. Then for me, kind of maybe 6 through somewhere in the mid-teens, somewhere I don't want to draw a firm line, but somewhere around 15, 16, 17. These were teams that were also good last year and have a bunch returning, but also have maybe some questions. We don't know exactly how they're going to be. This is the messy middle of my bracket. I expect all of these teams to be good to some degree, but starting to lose a lot of confidence to some degree. And I'll also call out that there's a line between 5 Wash U and 6 Trinity Connecticut that's probably as big of a gap as there is between like 6 Trinity Connecticut and 16 Illinois Wesleyan or something like that. I think to me my confidence level really takes a hit there. I think Trinity's going to be good. I voted them number 6. Just a little bit not sure of how it's going to turn out for them in the NESCAC and everything. So again, I'll read this list for the podcast only people. But at number 6, I had Trinity, Connecticut. Number 7, Randolph-Macon. Number 8, Emory. Number 9, NYU. Number 10, Mount Union. 11, Tufts. 12, Calvin. 13, St. John's. 14, Trinity, Texas. 15, Keene State. 16, Illinois Wesleyan. And I'll throw in number 17, Guilford, maybe kind of into this group as well. So that's kind of the middle of my bracket. And in the end, maybe, I feel pretty good about Wisconsin Lutheran at 18. They return a whole bunch of from a team who lost an overtime game at Wash U. So I do feel good about them as an inclusion here. Carnegie Mellon, Nebraska Wesleyan, Maryville. These were all teams that were good last year, maybe on the fringes of national kind of top 25 conversation at times. I think they'll be good. Pomona Pitzer at 22, TCNJ at 23, Cal Lutheran at 24, and Hope at 25. These are good teams, good programs we've seen the last few years. I'm not sure that these are going to be top 25 teams, but they're teams that I like to bet on based on what I presume that they have returning or have been confirmed to have returning, what their program strength typically is. And I feel good enough about these teams to be in my preseason top 25 rather than the teams that are just outside.
you identified that tier break after the top five, but as I was looking at your ballot compared to how the top 25 preseason poll came out, just with every ballot included, I felt like you had good agreement on a top eight. And then
Okay.
it's that number nine spot where you were one of the big outliers there with NYU, who finished number 22 in the total poll. And then as we were tracking public ballots before the full poll was released, we had yours plus five others, and you at that point were the only voter for NYU. So you're clearly much higher on NYU than anyone we are specifically aware of, and then even just kind of generally, how your ballot looks compared to the full 25 voter panel.
Yeah, on NYU specifically, that was something I saw as other people made their ballots public. Like I was pretty high on NYU, and when I was reassessing that, maybe I am too high. I think they do return, I think at least an average amount of talent from their roster to the next year. They do lose the D3Hoops.com National Player of the Year, so that's no small thing. I think he won a lot of games for them last year, kind of in closing minutes. But I think they also, I'm expecting an influx of talent. I think we've seen some transfers coming their way. I think that program has some strength. It might prove that number 9 is too high. Maybe that they should have been more. I think, what did they finish? Do you say 22 or so in the polls? That's fine. But as I kind of called it out, for me, from that 6 to like 17 range, there wasn't always a ton of separation between those teams. So like, I didn't see that as a big gap. But yeah, that's where they fell. And I was high. I recognize that I'm kind of high on them right now.
Well, I think NYU is going to be a fantastic, interesting team to watch this season, Matt. You talked about the talent, but I think they've had a really good collection of talent the last couple years, but maybe a surprising number of games seem to come down to they had Spencer Friedman, the other team didn't.
Yeah.
So it's maybe unfair to say somehow the whole felt like less than the sum of its parts. But it really is when it came down to winning time. Spencer Friedman was able to take over, and really the difference was they had him, someone else didn't. So very interested to see that dynamic moving forward. And maybe that's just what happens when you do have a player like that, and not having it means other people have the opportunity to step up. And talent, again, across the board hasn't really been an issue. So maybe there's someone who does that. But gonna be one of my more interesting teams to watch, I think, this season.
Yeah, I think again on NYU, to me they were a team that won some games because they had Friedman in those closing minutes. I also felt at times the rest of the team would just defer to him so much in those closing minutes that maybe, as a team they could have maybe closed out some games better than that. But you're right; they'll be an interesting team to watch this year as far as who they are.
I have two more teams that I picked out that I thought you looked a little bit higher on than the consensus. That being Mount Union, and then Pomona Pitzer was the other one I picked out. Any particular comments you want to make on Mount Union or Pomona Pitzer?
Yeah, Mount Union. I mean, there's still players on that team that are from the Final Four team we saw 2 seasons ago now that are still going to be on this team. Players like Christian Parker, who are preseason All-America list players. I think Mount Union's still good. They had trouble with John Carroll last year in the OAC. I think they lost to them twice in the regular season, and I believe again in the OAC tournament, if I'm remembering correctly, of how that tournament went down last year. They were a good team. They're a team, though, last year they were on our Pool C considerations for those final spots. They ultimately did not make the tournament. But looking at NPI history, of if we kind of replicate what NPI would have been, they're a team that would have made the field, I believe, if the system that's going to be in place this year was in place last year. So they maybe would have had a chance to prove themselves in March. Maybe we would have a different opinion of Mount Union or their season last year if they had that opportunity to get in. I think either way, they weren't a slam dunk NPI team. They were still like last four in, and I think the current system they were probably first four out or something like that. So not a huge difference there. But I think our last memory of a team, not making a tournament versus having a chance to prove themselves can make a big difference. And I think I like Mount Union's chances again this year to maybe not win the OAC, but compete strong in there. And if they can get into a tournament, show themselves on the national stage.
And then it was interesting because as I was going through trying to find teams that maybe you were lower on than the poll, it seemed like you had a few of those teams you were just a little bit higher on without necessarily coming at the expense of anyone. So it may be unfair to say that you're lower on Keene State than the consensus poll. You do have them 15 there. I believe they're a little bit closer, maybe 11, 12, something like that.
10,
in
the
the
10
total.
in the net.
Okay, they got that last top 10 spot. And then also Hampton Sydney. You talked about the lasting impression from the year before can have a big impact on some people's preseason ballot. Uh, Hampton Sydney, I think for you, ultimately wasn't really a team that got a lot of consideration from you, but they did get into one of those bottom 5 spots here in the preseason top 25 poll overall.
Yeah, they were 23rd in the final poll. I did not have them in. They're kind of a watch list team for me. They're a great team last year. We saw them as national runners up. They were a team like all year long was probably like number 1, number 2, or number 3 in the poll. They were on top of my ballot for much of the year. They're going to have some great players returning. I think that's another program that's good and strong. They're also losing a whole bunch though from that team. They have some key players who are returning for sure. But when I look at a top 25, it's just hard when there's a team that loses so much to peg them that high. They're definitely a team I did give consideration to. Ultimately, had them on the outside. I start basically kind of like at 20. I was kind of looking for them, so I wouldn't say I was maybe too different than what the actual top 25 ended up being, except for I just kept finding reasons for other teams to be in ahead of them. Honestly, a team like Guilford, I had iterations with them in and higher than I have them here. I have them at 17. I had iterations of them out. They're another team that loses a whole bunch. One thing I heard from Guilford is that they have kind of like a legit D1 type player coming in to add to the other players that are returning from that Final Four team. So I gave some deference to that. I don't like to try to go overboard on like transfer talk and types of things, but I think maybe they do have a really key player coming in there. So I hope I'm wrong on Hampton Sydney. There's a lot of great folks there. We met a lot of cool people down at the Final Four. Definitely a good program. They could be in the mix for sure.
So a top 25 ballot, Matt, is one form of preview or opinion, and that's what the bulk of this show is going to be about. We asked the viewership to give us their bold predictions or hot takes as we head into the season, kind of gauge the pulse. And before we get into that, Matt, there are some people out there who will try to tell you very strongly that we are, somewhere in the midst of an AI revolution. Oh. Right? We've seen the rise of like Chat GPT. And so knowing that we were going to be taking on bold predictions and hot takes, I asked Google Gemini to give me some bold predictions and hot takes for the upcoming season. So before we get into our viewer submitted items, let's take a look at what Google Gemini has to say here, Matt, about its own bold predictions and hot takes. So number one here, it gave me 5, Matt. Okay. Maybe we're looking at a first-time champion, and you think, okay, yeah, that's cool, that's interesting. But you get into more specifics here. Google Gemini says a team that has never won a national champion will take home the title. Teams like Randolph-Macon, Illinois Wesleyan, or Wisconsin-Platteville could surprise and break through.
Would be great.
Now, of course, I think all 3 of those teams, yeah, you would say definitely they do have a chance to break through. One problem:
they've all won.
They've all won national champions before, so good try, Google Gemini. We'll call that 0 for 1. Number 2, a Cinderella story. A lower-seeded team will make a deep run in the tournament, potentially reaching the Final Four or even winning it all. Look out for underdogs like Babson, North Park, or Gustavus Adolphus. Now, I have no idea on what basis it's picking out those 3 teams, but hey, I think you could argue to varying degrees how likely any of those 3 are to actually make a run. But I would say if any of those 3 were to make a run, that would qualify as a Cinderella story. So we'll at least give partial credit on the premise, I think, on this one.
Give a third of a point for Babson. I think North Park and Gustavus Adolphus this year seem like they would certainly be lower seeded teams. Maybe they make a run. Let's go, Google Gemini. Let's see it.
All right, number 3, a conference dominates. One conference will have multiple teams make the Sweet 16 or beyond. The Centennial, NESCAC, or WIAC could have a strong showing. I got to say, man, I might give full marks to this one. Again, I don't know the particulars of how Google Gemini picked out the Centennial, NESCAC, or WIAC, but I would say all 3 have some degree of viability to them. So, hey, way to go, Google Gemini there.
I'll give them credit. We did see the NESCAC have multiple teams last year in the Sweet 16. I believe it was both Trinity and Tufts, and Was Williams also in the Sweet 16 as well last year? We saw the
Yes.
MIAA have multiple teams in the Sweet 16. We saw the ODAC have multiple teams in the Sweet 16. So some credit for maybe picking the correct conferences that could do that kind of a thing, but also um, saying one conference will have multiple teams in the Sweet 16. I think that's almost a certainty, right? It seems like
Yeah,
that happens every single year.
probably not as bold of a prediction as we'd hope in this segment. All right, number 4 and number 5, Matt. No particulars here, so we've got a little bit more to dive into. Number 4, a player breaks out. A lesser-known player will emerge as a star, leading their team to unexpected success. This could be a breakout sophomore or a senior who had been waiting for their moment. And number 5, a coaching change leads to success. A new head coach will have an immediate impact on their program, guiding them to a deep tournament run. This could be a veteran coach taking over a struggling program or a young coach making a name for themselves. Okay, yeah, interesting storylines. You could see that happening, but no specifics there. So I did follow up. I did follow up with Google
Okay.
Gemini, asking for some more specifics on those number 4 and number 5. And it gave me this, Matt. Breakout player Isaiah Morgan, Randolph-Macon
Great
College.
player.
This
Yeah.
sophomore guard has shown flashes of brilliance in his young career. With a full offseason to develop his skills, Morgan could become a dominant scorer and lead the Yellow Jackets to a deep tournament run. Sounds great until you check the Randolph-Macon roster and find out not only do they not have an Isaiah Morgan, it appears no Isaiah Morgan has ever played for Randolph-Macon. And Matt, the only going to google.com search, the only most remote form of alignment I could find on this is there appears to have been an Isaiah Morgan who ran track for Co, who would be a sophomore this school year.
For Co.
Yeah,
Okay.
track.
Okay.
So this is just
Yeah.
seems to not be anything based in reality. And furthermore, let's go on to that next one about that successful coaching change, Matt. Because Google Gemini says David Vieira, Wisconsin Platteville. Vieira, a former Division I assistant coach, took over the Pioneers program this offseason. With his experience and knowledge of the game, Vieira could quickly turn the Pioneers and make them a contender in the WIAC. Now, I don't know, Matt. This comes as news to me. It would certainly come as news to Jeff Gard.
Yeah.
I could not find any record of a David Vieira being any sort of basketball coach. So I think what it comes down to is Google Gemini just completely made stuff up here for number 4 and number 5.
Not surprised that AI would just make stuff up if it doesn't know the answer. And I watched a QCast episode with Jeff Gard like a week ago, talking about the Platteville season upcoming. So I don't think there's been a change in the last week up at their coaching ranks. So I think AI got this one wrong. We'll give them negative points for Isaiah Morgan and for David Vieira because I think they do not exist.
All right, so we think that our viewers can do a better job, Matt, because
Yeah.
we know we have great viewers,
We have great people here.
and including a group we want to thank here, a group of great people who have partnered with us to support us financially through Patreon at patreon.com/D3Datacast. We're grateful for their ongoing support, grateful that they're joining us in our goal to put this show on weekly, to run d3datacast.com, where we'll be having all of the NPI numbers throughout the year, your efficiency ratings. That will all be there, available for anyone to view. No paywalls, no ads, because we are viewer supported 100% by these folks on Patreon.
Yeah, thank you so much for these folks. We have fun every week doing these episodes. Now that we get to talk about games and make predictions and make picks, it's a fun time of year. So thanks to these people. If you would like to join them, as Zach said, patreon.com/D3Datacast and join either the Good Job Team or the Great Job Team tier at $3 or $5 a month.
Lots of ways to support us beyond that. Of course, subscribing to our YouTube channel helps us out a ton. We're on our way to 1,000 subscribers. So that's the next big number. We're not even worrying about 900. We're going to blow right through 900, go straight to 1,000, and it'll be fun when we get there. Follow us on socials. We're most active on Twitter/X, whatever you want to call it today, at D3Datacast. We're also on Facebook, facebook.com/D3Datacast. Honestly, the best way to support the show, subscribe to the channel, watch the show, and tell a D3 Hoops friend.
Yep.
All right, let's get on to our viewer submissions, Matt, for our bold predictions and hot takes. Let's start here with Joshua White, who says Laterno will win the ASC before moving on to the SCAC next year.
This is going to be an interesting conference to watch. We know it's only, 5 teams this year is going to be the ASC, as it's kind of been shrinking. Laterno's going to be on the move, their last season in the conference. This is one, I think you described it, Zach, in an earlier episode of like spin the wheel and see which team you think is going to win the ASC race. The coaches maybe picked Hardin Simmons in their preseason poll, I believe is correct. But yeah, there could be some great battles in the ASC. So let's go Laterno. I love the pick.
Yeah, of the 5 teams that are left in the ASC right now, I think there's only one team winning it that would really surprise me. You mentioned the preseason poll. It looks like in the ASC with the smaller membership, they didn't do just a coaches poll, but they did a combined coaches and SID poll, so they could get a few more votes. Laterno finished 3rd in that vote, but they did receive one first place vote, and I think it's a 4-team race there in the ASC with certainly Laterno in the mix. So thank you, Joshua. I think you could be onto something there. Laterno very much looks to be in the mix in the ASC. Matt, our next one here comes from Connor Paul. With a bold prediction, Hampton-Sydney will sweep Randolph-Macon en route to back-to-back Final Four appearances. We talked about Hampton-Sydney a little bit, and I have a feeling like you're going to call this one. I don't know if you want to categorize this based on what you're voting in the top 25 as a bold prediction or a hot take. React to me.
It's bold. I was wondering what you thought of which is the bolder half. Hampton-Sydney sweeping Randolph-Macon or making it to back-to-back Final Four appearances. Because last year, I think they split with Randolph-Macon in the regular season, and then Hampton-Sydney went to the Final Four. But we also saw Guilford, another ODAC, in the Final Four. So is it more likely that they don't sweep Randolph-Macon, but they still make the Final Four, or they sweep Randolph-Macon, but they can't make the Final Four? So that's kind of what's interesting to me about this question.
I hadn't thought about it that way, but I'll be honest. I don't think either are very likely.
No, probably not.
Just from where I sit today. So I don't know that I could break it down, because I don't feel like either are very, very likely. I don't know. And if Hampton-Sydney, in a usual year, you would say, yeah, if you're a team capable of sweeping Randolph-Macon, you're probably like a Final Four contender,
yeah.
right? But I don't know. Who knows? It's a new year. Maybe Hampton-Sydney, if they did sweep Randolph-Macon, maybe it would say more about Randolph-Macon than Hampton-Sydney. I don't know.
Yeah, and interesting last year, right? Hampton-Sydney was the Final Four team. They split with Macon, as I said. Macon won the league. So, again, that's just such a strong league that you can finish 2nd, 3rd, 4th in the regular season and still be a Final Four candidate. So that's just why I thought that was interesting. But I do love the hot take. It was definitely in the spirit of the show. So thank you, Connor, for reaching out.
Mitchell Roy, Matt, has a bold prediction that Endicott will win the CNE. And in case, for people who may not have followed the news over the summer, the CNE is the old Commonwealth Coast Conference, rebranded as the Conference of New England.
The Cone.
Yeah. Nichols has seemed to kind of have a lock on what was the Triple C, now going by the CNE moniker. But Mitchell likes Endicott here to maybe break that streak.
Yeah, I like the pick. I think this is definitely a bold prediction. I think they're a team that could be on the rise. We did our conference champions draft episode, and probably unsurprisingly, when I prepare for that, I like to make little formulas to just try to determine like a loose order of teams in each conference. And Endicott is a team that comes out well in that formula. But one thing I didn't know then, and I don't think I even know now, is if we've seen an official roster from Endicott. So I wasn't quite sure of the players listed as seniors from last year, which were coming back or which were not coming back. So a little bit up in the air. But Endicott, from my little crazy formulas that are probably not accurate at all, that I used for a silly little draft episode contest between friends, showed that they were maybe competitive in the CNE. So I love the pick. I'm on board with the pick. I think as a bold prediction, Endicott to win the CNE, I buy it.
The next one came to our Gmail, Matt, here from Thomas Quarry. Newman to win the Atlantic East, Widener to win the MAC Commonwealth, and Arcadia to win the MAC Freedom. I like this triple pack here because all 3 picks are different than what ended up going as picks when we did our conference champion draft.
Oh, okay. So that is pretty bold. That is definitely pretty bold. Also love professional basketball players taking their time to submit questions or hot takes or bold predictions for our show. We know we have a great friend of the pod here in Mr. Thomas Quarry, so thank you for reaching out. I think Newman to win the Atlantic East. I think that's about as likely as anyone. I think we picked in that conference. Did someone pick Marymount maybe in our draft episode? You picked Marymount. Okay.
I did.
So Newman would not be my top choice, but I can see them being a team that's right there in the mix and about as likely as anyone. So I will buy the Newman pick. Widener to win the MAC Commonwealth. I think they were like a number 1 overall seed in the tournament last year. They had a really great year. I think they won the MAC Commonwealth last year. My hesitation for them was it seemed like they were kind of grad student heavy already last year. So what does return and what are they going to be missing? Are they going to be missing some of their key pieces? So I'm not sure about that, but it's just such a strong conference as well. We had some really strong teams out of the MAC Commonwealth last year. So can Widener repeat there? That one I'm going to be so-so on. I'm going to give a middling response to Widener. And then Arcadia to win the MAC Freedom is something right now that I do not really see a path for. I will admit that I don't have the whole MAC Freedom like locked down in my order, but they were not a team that jumped out to me as a team that I would necessarily pick in the MAC Freedom. So I'm going to not buy that one. So I'm going to go about 50% in line here with Mr. Quarry.
I believe you were the picker of the MAC Freedom in our conference champion draft.
Oh, I picked I think I picked
correct?
DeSales, right?
You went with DeSales.
Yes. Yep. But it was like DeSales or like Stevens, right? So like it wasn't going to be Arcadia. It wasn't going to be a pick.
Okay. So we'll see. We have one here from Greek Tragedy who's here with
eight here from Greek Tragedy.
An 8-piece bold prediction and hot take. Now, Matt, we'll allow it because for last year's show when we did this, Greek Tragedy, I believe, had 5 picks, and they came out looking pretty good. Okay. Greek Tragedy did well, so we'll allow the 8-parter here.
Maybe he can make like a fantasy draft for his picks and see like which one will be best.
But I think the only fair way to grade this is like parlay style, right? Okay. You have to get, if you're going to submit 8, you got to do it as a parlay where you have to get all 8 to be correct.
Plus 3,000, but you got to get them all. Yeah.
All right, let's go one by one and maybe give just a quick reaction. Platteville doesn't win the WIAC outright.
That's really bold off the bat. I know it's a tough league. It's a strong league. There's going to be a lot of good teams. I like lacrosse. I think Stevens Point is on the rise again. Oshkosh is probably better than they were a year ago. But, man, Platteville looks loaded. They won the league last year by several games, I think, didn't they?
I think 3.
So,
but, Matt, let's look at the logo here. Greek Tragedy's logo on.
He's a Stevens Point.
Well, but who did Platteville have problems with last year?
They did. They had problems with Stevens Point. Were they 0 for 2 on Stevens Point?
I believe they were. And, right? So Kent Dernbach in his second year now at Stevens Point, I think they've had an influx of talent. If they were already giving Platteville trouble, maybe, right? And I think that there's going to be whatever that second tier is of the WIAC, I think will be improved over last year. So I don't expect a 3-game cushion there for Platteville. Now, is it enough for someone to at least tie them? I don't know. We'll see.
It's a bold pick, but I'm only going to give it like 25%. I'm not on board with this pick.
All right. How about this one? Illinois Wesleyan does the League and Cup double and makes it to the Sweet 16.
Yeah, I mean, there's 3 predictions in this one second prediction.
Right.
So it's going to be tough for all of them to come through, but I think the sentiment is something that I buy. To me, Illinois Wesleyan is the class of the CCIW preseason-wise, or at least looks like it. So I would not be surprised to see them at least pull the double and do the league and the cup. Now, tournament, anything can happen, but kind of where I have them and where the top 25 voters have them in the poll, they're kind of in that line of like a Sweet 16 could make sense.
Number 3, none of last season's Final Four makes this season's Final Four. All right, we've already talked about ways that you may be dubious on the chances of Hampton-Sydney and Guilford to get back there. That leaves Trine and Trinity, 2 teams you are voting very highly in your preseason poll.
Yeah, I still just think like this is, I think, a hot take or a bold prediction you could make every single season because it's almost always correct. And I think it's not any shots at the teams that were there last year or what they returned. Like I almost made this exact same prediction for this episode. I think maybe you made this last year.
I think I used it last year.
And you were right.
Yeah, but in my defense, last year we thought, oh, Christopher Newport is back with everyone. Yes. And Mount Union has, a lot coming back. Whitewater lost like literally nothing. Right. So I did make it, but I feel like you could make it every year. And this year in particular is maybe less bold than it has been in previous years.
Yes. And like where voters have Trine, like they could be in the Final Four next year. A lot of people have Trinity pretty high. I have Trinity kind of on those fringes, so that's fine. But just the randomness of a tournament and a season overall, I think it's just so unlikely that even a really good team gets to the Final Four, I think it would be like less than 50-50 odds for sure, like way less.
Right. The road is tough enough where the odds to not are always going to be greater than the odds
just
to
because
get
of
there.
randomness, right? Just because of randomness.
Correct. All right, a UAA team makes the Final Four. Matt, the UAA famously has had, a lot of tournament opportunities, but maybe not as much tournament success as some other conferences have had with fewer opportunities.
I'm just glad a couple of them got to the second weekend last year, because that was rough 2 years ago when they were all bounced first weekend after getting so many teams in. But I mean, like, Wash U is good enough. Emory, I think, is good enough, or at least looks that way in the preseason, right? We don't know. The rest of that conference is so good. We know, like, 1 through 8, they're going to be all in the top 25% of Division III. They're going to be in the top kind of 100 teams. It's so good. I can definitely see it. He doesn't name which one, but I can see a UAA. The other advantage that the conference has is they can be geographically separated in brackets just based on 500-mile rule. So whereas you can only do so much with the WIAC if 2 or 3 teams made it, just because of the way geography works. Like Texas teams or SCIAC teams are going to be kind of generally potted together most often. UAA doesn't always have that, so you have a chance of multiples. We saw multiple ODACs get there last year, so I think there will be multiple teams that have an opportunity to get there out of the UAA. So I'm going to give this a high grade that I rather agree with the take as well.
Well, just going back to your ballot, you have 3 UAA teams in your top 10 and 4 overall in your top 25.
Okay. Yeah. High on the UAA.
All right. Number 5, the American Rivers Conference goes from 4 tournament teams to 1.
I think I definitely buy the sentiment. Last year, I think I don't have all the numbers right in front of me right now. I know where the Datacast. I didn't pull the data. To me, it seemed like the ARC and like the ARC, sorry, those 4 teams that were kind of in the tournament, plus even Central, who was maybe on that cusp for a lot of the years. They were a little bit more on the experienced side, and maybe they're not bringing back quite as much. So I could buy the fact that maybe the ARC is a 1-bid league. There's also a lot of paths for them to get 2 and or 3 teams in. Maybe not 3 plus, but like 1 or 2. So I think I like the sentiment. It's kind of a so-so one for me, but I think I know where he's coming from, and I can kind of buy that idea for a hot take.
6, someone west of the Mississippi makes the Final Four.
Okay, so that's 1 team. So what is we're messaging a little bit about this. This is most of the MIAC. This is the ARC.
Yeah, I will admit, I dive into my Minnesota geography for this, because the way that the Mississippi River splits the Twin Cities, right? Yeah. So, I think if you're looking for like the top of the MIAC, you probably are looking at St. John's, and they do qualify.
Yeah. Not St. Paul, but Minneapolis does qualify, and then Collegeville, St. John's is like,
right, is northwest of the Twin Cities.
Yeah. So Wash U, though, also I believe is just west of the Mississippi in St. Louis.
Counts.
So they count.
Yeah, I think they would be your if you were looking for like who's the most likely west of the Mississippi, I think they would be my leader in the clubhouse.
Yep. You're also talking about half of the SLIAC, maybe. So
I don't know that you're talking about them, but they would be eligible, but I don't know that you'd be talking about them.
If in their last year Fontbonne goes on a magical run, that they would qualify Greek Tragedy here for the win. You're talking about most of the ASC and the SCAC, if not all of those 2 conferences. You're talking about the SCIAC, the Northwest Conference. Colorado College is in there. Oh, I guess they're in the SCAC. And so yeah, that's one of the teams that we're talking about. A team like that making the Final Four, like you said, Wash U being in like the top 5 nationally. I think this is a prediction that looks really, really bold, but then maybe not that bold once you break it down.
You could even say like, okay, you give me 5 teams. Give me a champion in the Northwest Conference, a champion in the SCIAC. Give me Trinity in Texas. Give me Wash U, and give me St. John's. Like, what are the odds if you give me those 5 teams? What are the odds that one of them makes the Final Four?
And depending on geography, you could get down to a Sweet 16 where it's like Nebraska Wesleyan and Wash U and a Texas team and St. John's, and you're like, well, one of these teams is going to make the Final Four.
Right. Yeah. I didn't even mention the American Rivers, but bring them into the picture there too. All right. Number 7, a Pool C team wins the Natty. Of course, we just saw that last year. Trine entered the tournament as a Pool C at-large bid and won the national champion. What do you think about the prospects of that happening again this year?
Yeah, I think I'm just trying to think, like in recent
I
history,
mean,
how's it
I'd have
won?
to
So
go.
like it
Yeah,
was
right.
last year. The year before was not. It was a Pool A. Christopher
Correct.
Newport. The year before was a Pool A. Randolph Macon.
Right. But I
And
think here's what I'll say. I think with conference tournaments, that always there's always a group of teams that don't win their Pool A that maybe entered that final weekend as favorites, and just the way it's awarded. Like this is like if you said this for football, I think it would be a much bolder
yeah,
prediction, right? You don't have conference tournament
right.
upsets to worry about. Um, so basically, if you're talking about a Pool C team, you're talking about someone who has already lost along the way, then making that run to the national champion. It's a different
Yeah,
dynamic in basketball. And I think just with conference tournaments, it takes one national contender to get upset, and suddenly they're in Pool C, and
you're right.
they
Yeah,
may still enter the tournament as the favorite.
yeah. I buy it as a viability. It's probably 25% chance of happening or something like that.
And finally, number 8, Greenville or Grinnell makes the NCAAs. This is notable because Matt, that would give us some the system basketball in the tournament on the national stage.
And then like you're an upset or two away from the matchup between the two teams, maybe just depending on how things get bracketed, maybe they get in there. Um, I think Grinnell is maybe one of the top two teams in the Midwest Conference. Illinois College and Grinnell, I think, are maybe going to battle it out in my unlearned opinion. And Greenville is maybe as in the mix in the SLIAC as any team. So like, let's go. Like they could win those two conference tournaments and both get in. Sure.
I like it. I like it. All right, that wraps up the viewer participation segment. Matt, we have our own bold predictions and hot takes to get through. We're going to start with our bold prediction. We each have one of each. Starting with my bold prediction, Matt, I said that in their first season of eligibility as a full NCAA Division III member, Asbury will play for a chance to go to the NCAA tournament, but will lose to Maryville in the CCS tournament championship game. On the doorstep and turned away.
So so you think they're not going to be Pool C viable then?
Correct.
I know that's not maybe specifically what you're saying, but it's kind of implying they're Pool A or
Yeah.
bust. But they're going to be
Yeah.
they're going to be right there, and then they're not
Right.
going to
Within
make
a
it.
game, they're going to be playing for the chance in their
Okay.
first season of eligibility,
I
playing for the chance to go to the tournament.
Honestly, I picked Maryville as the CCS regular season winner in our champions draft. And I did not consider anyone else in that conference. So I was trying to think through like, okay, who's going to be the most competitive in the CCS? And I will not be able to react to your thing here because I do not know. I looked at Maryville and then I kind of like stopped and then I said my champion is Maryville.
Well, maybe there's another dynamic to consider here, Matt, is that, the seeding has to work out so that they don't meet Maryville
True.
earlier in the tournament.
Semifinals, yeah, yep.
Correct.
So
Right.
that
So
means if
like,
Maryville's our 1, then Asbury's
then maybe
probably
they're the
like the
2.
2 or the 3, right?
Right.
Okay, let's go. Let's do it.
All right.
That takes to my bold prediction here. Two teams that we've already mentioned a couple times. I'm gonna say the ODAC was the best league last year in Division III. They got two.
Here we go. Here comes the compliment sandwich.
Two teams in the Final Four, and they were both great. Hampton Sydney and Guilford. I'm gonna say, even though I have Guilford in my top 25, Hampton Sydney on my watch list just outside. I'm going to say neither one of those two teams makes the tournament this season. I'm taking no value judgment on Randolph Macon at this point. But I think if the ODAC gets multiple bids, it's some other teams than these two. So we're going to see someone like a Roanoke or a Washington and Lee or something like that happening in the ODAC. Maybe another year of Randolph Macon. But my bold prediction is that these two Final Four teams from the same conference will not be in the tournament next year.
Okay. One or the other to make the tournament. Are the odds better or worse than 4%?
To what are my actual opinion odds on either one of them making the tournament?
Yeah.
That's probably like 75% chance that like either one makes the tournament.
Okay. All right, Matt. I think you're going to end up on some bulletin boards in
that's fine. Let's go.
Like
I'm trying to have
Virginia, North Carolina area. Okay, Matt. My hot take is that NPI will set the NCAA tournament field and the D3 Hoops community will mostly shrug. There's been a lot of controversy about NPI as it was developed and the legislative process that took place or didn't take place to implement it and everything that after it was supposed to be implemented, and the education process, the
The
the just the format itself. It's been a hot button topic. We're seeing it currently playing out in football. Now there are some dynamics in play in football that I think are unique to football. But I think we're going to get to the end and we're going to get the teams, and it's going to tell us who the teams are, and you're like, all right, yeah, I mean that seems fine.
yeah.
So my hot take is that it ends up being a freezing cold take.
Yeah, no, I'm going to agree with this. I think this is what's going to happen. I think we're going to say like, yeah, it worked for basketball pretty well. There's always going to be the discussion of the last two teams and
Sure.
the first two teams, and like, could you have made another argument for a different side? But I think the types of teams that it selects are going to be rather non-controversial, and any controversy that exists will be similar type controversy, no different than we've had in the past couple of years. And I think you're right. There was the hot buttonness of the topic was that I think coach type people that we heard from, or conference type people, thought that is it happening or is it not happening was too secretive. The education about what the system would be like was maybe lacking or slow to roll out. And then in football specifically, we know people, as we're seeing numbers now, there's a couple of considerations, like, is 10 games just difficult for this type of system in general, one, and two, were the dial settings that the committees had an opportunity to set, was there maybe better options for football in particular? Should strength of schedule been considered more than it is now? So I think those are two different but maybe related conversations in football. I think when we get to basketball, I think the number of games, 25 regular season games for teams, or the opportunity to play 25 D3 games, plus a lot more non-conference opportunity for most teams, like 10, 11, 12, depending on the conference. I think that's going to give you more cross-pollination, more time for the NPI to mix and get better numbers. And I think we're overall going to see the same types of teams that committees have been selecting last year or the years before, right? It's going to be very, very similar.
And for anyone who still is like, what's this NPI they're talking about? What's going on? Go back to episode 83 of the D3 Datacast, where we really dove deep into NPI, what it is, how this new metric that's going to select and seed the tournament works. And then we dove really deep, Matt, into looking at like over the past 3 years, how and why maybe some different decisions were made by the old system that we were used to, and then how NPI would have seen the field.
Yeah.
All right, Matt, hit us with your hot take.
Okay, my hot take. I'm going to go to the CCIW, one of our traditional power conferences. I already went to the ODAC, so I'm going to go to the CCIW now. And looking at the national landscape, looking at the coaches poll from that conference, I was a little bit confused. So I'm going to say either in the CCIW that there's one team here that is going to be like a second weekend type NCAA tournament team, nationally relevant on the national stage. So there's either one team there that's going to be like above all the rest, or there's no teams that are like second weekend caliber, and they're all going to be kind of mixed up. I don't want to specifically call out Carthage here in this conversation, but it's something I do not currently buy. The coaches poll had Illinois Wesleyan 5 first place votes, Carthage 4 first place votes, like almost neck and neck. That's not my opinion. That's not my hot take. I think Illinois Wesleyan wins this conference by like 3 games, and they're the only team that's really, like, when we look at the bracket, they're a team that could advance. I think you're going to maybe see, like, CCIW often has multiple teams in, or they're the type of conference that can get multiple teams in, but they're not. I don't see right now that they're a conference that's going to get teams that are going to be talking about going far into the tournament. We'll see what they have. I think that league as a whole took a little bit of a step back last year. I think they're going to be working on taking those steps forward. I don't think they're there yet. So I'm saying it's either Illinois Wesleyan or it's nobody in that conference right now. I don't see anyone else that's going to really compete for those types of, nationally relevant is like a hot takey term that doesn't really mean anything. I'm kind of thinking of like a Sweet 16 type of a team when I say that. I don't buy that Carthage is that right now. Let's see if they can prove me wrong out there in Kenosha.
Okay. I think I'm a little bit more reserved in my take about how the separation might play out at the top. I think I'm much more in wait and see mode. But I think in general, I think the strength of the conference this year will look more like it did last year than than what we're used to seeing, where we're talking about like 2 or 3 teams that are like legitimate Sweet 16 second weekend type contenders. Um, and that's not to say that it's not going to be a competitive league, right? So because I think sometimes competitiveness gets mistaken for strength, right? Right? Competitiveness or this like anyone could beat anyone just means that the teams are closely grouped together. It doesn't say where that that group places in relation to the national picture. Um, but I can see a scenario where at least Illinois Wesleyan is back to that step where they're making a deep run or capable of making a deep run with players that are like all American type player caliber players. I think this week we saw the preseason All American list from D3Hoops.com, and Nick Roper was on that list. If you told me by the end of the year that Harrison Wilmson was like a player at the center position who's getting some All American looks from that panel in the end of year rank list, I could see that happening. So it's just a matter of I can buy that. We talked about that with Greek tragedies, bold predictions. I can buy into that step. It's just a matter of what's going to happen behind them, and maybe the gap isn't as big as as you're suggesting, but that also doesn't mean it closes enough where we're talking about a second or third team being capable or likely to make that second weekend tournament run. It'll be fun to watch.
Always a good conference to watch. So yeah. Mm-hmm.
All right, Matt, that's great. Always good to have an opportunity out there on camera to look back on and look silly. Another one here, Matt. We're bringing back the weekly picks. We've got a slate of 5 games as we will throughout the season. Every week we'll be back with a 5 game slate to pick against the efficiency rating computer line. So we're picking not just winners here, but picking against the computer line.
Yeah, so we did an episode a few weeks back about the preseason efficiency ratings, talking about how they're set. We went over some of the top teams in that list. So we can run all of the matchups through those efficiency ratings and we get like a fake line, like a fake betting line against it. So we always pick against those. Zach picks out 2 games every week. I pick out 2 games every week. And then we try to agree on what looks like the best overall game of the week. So here's the slate. I'm going to read out all the games and then we'll make our picks. First is a November 8 game, Bethany Lutheran from Minnesota against Trinity, Texas. Then we have Eastern from the MAC Commonwealth and Roanoke from the ODAC. Sorry, I'll read the lines. Bethany Lutheran was a 3-point underdog against Trinity, Texas on a neutral court. Eastern is a 1.5-point underdog against Roanoke on a neutral court. Our third game is national runners-up Hampton Sydney, 3-point favorites by the computer on the road at Swarthmore. A second November 9 game, Mary Hardin Baylor, 1.5-point underdogs against Heidelberg in a game that's being taken place at Trine University. And then our D3 Datacast game of the week, 2 teams that are in the preseason top 25 poll. Calvin, 1-point favorites on a neutral site against UW-Platteville in a game that will be played at Illinois Wesleyan University. So Zach, I think usually you have the first pick. Going back up to the top of the list, who do you like there?
Yeah, you make me go first so that you can copy my picks, Matt. I'm going to lay the 3 points here and go with Trinity. This is a good measuring stick game for a Bethany Lutheran program that I think is right and deserving to be playing this type of game, to be looking for those measuring stick games. But I think Trinity is a team that I think last season didn't really finish the way that they wanted it to or could have. Looking for strong things from the Tigers this year. Give me Trinity laying the 3.
Yeah, I think actually neither team finished the season exactly how they wanted it. Bethany Lutheran was kind of a hip upset pick in the early rounds, and I think they just got pasted by UW-Platteville early on in a statement game. But I kind of agree with where you're going with this. Trinity, Texas, to me, they look like the stronger, more nationally tested team, even though they kind of seemed like they petered out into end of conference season, conference tournament, and the national tournament last year. But only 3 points in the line. I think that there's a bigger gap than that with these two teams. So I'm going to say Trinity, Texas wins by more than 3 points. Second game is Eastern and Roanoke neutral court. What do you like, Zach?
Yeah, Eastern was really one of the stories down the stretch. I think, you talked about Widener getting that number 1 overall seed earlier in the episode, but I think, you could make the case that Eastern was the team out of the MAC Commonwealth that was playing the best at that point. But Roanoke, I think, is kind of been a team or a program that's been, laying in the weeds for a couple of years. They've done a good job of taking care of business in a lot of games against kind of like equal equal teams, but they've had that, when they've gotten into games against that like upper echelon in the ODAC, they've had problems taking that next step. So I think this is the type of game that Roanoke has been really good in, and I just, as a program, I think they're looking to take that next step into that, that leading group in the ODAC. Give me the Maroons here.
Yeah. Again, at risk of making this a little bit boring, I'm going to go a similar direction. I think Roanoke is hoping. I think they're poised to rise in the pecking order of the ODAC. They're a team that I like in that. Maybe not as a favorite in that conference, but if you're in the top 4 of the ODAC, you're competitive, rather competitive nationally. I'm very interested in seeing what Eastern returns, but for a close line within a point and a half, I have a little bit more confidence right now in Roanoke, and I think they're, like you said, looking to get these types of results against other nationally prominent teams. So I'm going to go with Roanoke as well and lay the 1.5. Hampton City 3-point favorites, true road game at Swarthmore.
Yeah, and given all the uncertainty we've talked about what exactly is this Hampton Sydney team going to look like, I'm going to take the early season opportunity to take points with a home underdog. Again, who knows exactly what Swarthmore is going to be, but I feel like there's a little bit more of like a program baseline to build in. You're going to give me 3 points with them at home, I'll take it.
Yeah, I'm going to go the same direction, and I'm also going to take Swarthmore for very similar reasons. Although last year we saw a big matchup between Hampton Sydney and Christopher Newport going on in the early season, and Hampton City was ultimately prepared for that game, and they just put themselves on the national map with that big win against Christopher Newport early last season. So we know Hampton City's can get ready for these big early season games, so I will expect them to be prepared. But like you said, a home team that's a good team, a good program with a good coach, and they're getting 3 points. I'm gonna go with the points. Neutral site game again. Mary Hardin Baylor from the ASC and Heidelberg from the OAC. 1.5 point spread here.
Yeah, the Crew getting the 1.5, but I like them outright. Give me Mary Hardin Baylor to beat Heidelberg, Matt. Another one of those teams that is, one of the the 4-team race that I see in the ASC. Mary Hardin Baylor's in there. I'm hearing good things about their club, and I think they can take care of Heidelberg here.
All right, I'm going to go the other way. We have a split ballot here at the D3 Datacast. I'm going to pick Heidelberg. I'm high on the strength that the OAC has had the last several seasons. I know Heidelberg has kind of been like maybe more 4th place in that league, but that's been a deep, strong league. On the other side, I've been maybe not impressed with the whole direction of the ASC. I know they've had shrinking memberships, but I think 2 years ago we were talking about them being kind of poised to be more nationally being more nationally dominant maybe. And then I don't think the ASC really turned out that way. I think the last season for Mary Hardin Baylor also did not trend the way they thought they were based on how 2 years ago went. So I think they're a little bit of a question mark for me. I don't know whether or not they're the favorite in the ASC. I think they'll be in that mix, but I do have some confidence in the strength of Heidelberg. This is in Indiana. It's in neither team's home state, but it's more geographically proximate to Heidelberg. So I'm just wondering, Mary Hardin Baylor coming all the way up to Indiana to play a tournament. Are they going to be fully prepared for that? Is the travel going to be too hard? Love the team, love the program, but I'm going to take Heidelberg, lay the 1.5, and say that the Student Princes can come out victorious. And then our game of the week. I think it's the biggest game, 2 top 10 teams. Calvin, neutral site, Platteville. We're going to maybe not learn a whole lot about these 2 teams right away on opening night, November 8th. It's a 1-point line. Calvin is a 1-point favorite. So, but in most intents and purposes here, you're going to be picking the outright winner. So, Zach, who do you like on this one?
Matt, I'm going to go with Calvin here. And just to bring some facts in here so I don't get labeled a homer, we're going to make this a fact-based decision here. The last time Calvin played an opening weekend game against a WIAC team ranked in the top 5, Matt, do you know what happened?
Calvin won. That was 2 years ago against UW Oshkosh, I believe.
Correct. That was a win. Matt, do you know what happened the last time Calvin opened a season with a game at the Shirk Center?
They won. That was in 2019 in Coach Bill Saul's first game at Calvin, and current assistant coach Derek DeVries scored, I believe, 28 points in a Calvin victory.
Correct, over Illinois Wesleyan. Yes. So there you go, Matt. Okay. The last time, so everything that's that's lining up for this game, top 5 opponent out of the WIAC game taking place at Shirk, everything lines up with recent history for this to be a Calvin win.
That you have a lot of great facts, a lot of great reasonings. I'm just going to say that Calvin's going to win. And the reasons that I have is because I believe that to be true in my heart. So I'm going to say Calvin covers the 1 point spread. It's going to be a great game. It's going to be a close game. It's going to come down to the final seconds, but Calvin can get that bucket or two that they need down the stretch. And they're going to knock off UW-Platteville, and it's going to cause some ripples, but not too many ripples because we're still talking about two top 10 teams here. So I said we're gonna maybe or maybe not learn a whole bunch of information about these teams. I'm thinking about this whole tournament that's being taken place. Well, yeah, it is a tournament, right? At Illinois Wesleyan University. 4 teams who are ranked in the preseason top 25. Everyone could end up kind of like 1-1, or someone could win 2 games or lose 2 games, and they could all be close. And it's just kind of like, yeah, these are all really good teams, and maybe we don't know that much. So interesting to see what we think we know coming out of the weekend about all these teams.
Well, that's just it. Because it's a tournament, we can't get, it's not like an opponent swap where you could get 4 teams that start the weekend 1-1 between Cal Lutheran, Illinois Wesleyan, Calvin, and Platteville. Because it is a tournament, you're guaranteed someone's going to exit that weekend 2-0. So 2 teams are going to be 1-1, and 1 team is going to, be heading home 0-2. Or I don't know, maybe that's Illinois Wesleyan and they're staying home 0-2. Who knows? So yeah, we'll see. Should be a great weekend of basketball. Looking forward to it. All right, and we'll keep track of our picks all year long, turn it into a season-long contest. Matt, last year I bested you 54 40-1 to 49-1. The year before, though, you got me 49-40 to 48-41.
Yeah, end of the year, it was not close for us last year, so I'll try to do a little bit better. We do have several people that like to play along, so make your picks in the comments below. You're going to have to keep track of your own points because it's going to be hard for us to collect all of that, but play along with us, post your comments below. And I believe like 2 years ago, our first year we did it, I beat you, but Ryan Scott, who played along in the comments, I think beat both of us all season long. So viewers are definitely welcome and likely to outperform the 2 hosts here, but it's just a fun thing that we like to do, so play along if you want.
All right, Matt, in the past we've had a segment we like to call Upset Watch, and it was, putting a team on upset alert. We're going to take maybe a slightly different approach to it this year, so that's why we have the quotations there, Upset Watch. We're taking a look at ranked teams playing unranked opponents that could be ripe for losing to that unranked team.
Yeah, I'm just going to talk through the 4 games that stuck out to me, and we'll decide whether or not they're even good Upset Watch candidates. The first one is kind of surprising in how it turns out. It's Elmhurst versus Wisconsin Lutheran. So you're like, the first reaction is, well, yeah, could Wisconsin Lutheran upset Elmhurst? No, it's the other way around. Wisconsin Lutheran comes in with high expectations, number 15. This is a home game for them, so Elmhurst goes to Wisconsin Lutheran. Wisconsin Lutheran is returning all 5 starters from last year. They looked great. They had every chance of beating WashU at WashU last year in the tournament. Elmhurst is a good team, is a good program, probably does have a lot that is back or returning, but they lose a bunch of good players. I think Itunis and Zapinski are gone, if I recall their roster correctly, from last year's team that was in the tournament. So is this an upset? Like, if a CCIW beats Wisconsin Lutheran, like, is that an upset? I don't know, but Elmhurst did not receive any votes in the top 25, I don't think, and Wisconsin Lutheran is number 15, so it kind of seemed upsetty to me. But it's definitely a game that Elmhurst could win. So, like, are we putting Wisconsin Lutheran on upset watch? Maybe we are. The next game I was taking a look at was Babson and NYU. I thought, like, yeah, NYU's ranked, Babson's not. I kind of want to eliminate this game from upset watch consideration because even though I had NYU, like, in the bottom part of my top 10, the voting body only had them at 22, and Babson also got votes. Although I think this is a true road game for Babson, not 100% sure.
It is.
Okay, that helps the upset nature, but I think like the nature of a number 22 versus a team receiving votes doesn't really feel that upsetty to me. So maybe Babson and NYU is not as much of an upset as it would have been maybe last year at this time or something like that. Another game that could be an upset, UW Oshkosh against St. John's. St. John's getting a lot of love from me and the other voters, coming in at number 12 overall. I think this is at St. John's in Minnesota there. UW Oshkosh kind of struggled last year. They had to replace some key players from the year previously. They had some injuries that they were dealing with early in the season. So in the non-conference and into the WIAC, they really struggled. I think they'll be better this year, but how much better, I'm not sure. like a Wyack versus St. John's, especially a Wyack with a name like UW Oshkosh, doesn't feel like an upsetty game. But again, we're talking about a team that was outside of the Massey top 100, I believe, last year in Oshkosh against a team like St. John's, who feels like they're on the rise, returning a ton and in the top 15 of the national poll. So I think that this is another team like this could be an upset type game if St. John's is not careful. And
Yeah,
then, go
one more
ahead.
thing on Oshkosh, Matt, that stuck out to me that just really highlighted how atypical of a year it was for them. They were the last team to get a WIAC win last year,
Yeah,
right?
right.
Everyone, you look there was a point at the conference standings, everyone had a win except for Oshkosh was down there at that point. I think they were 0-5 or 0-6 before they were able to get a win when everyone else in the conference had at least one conference win.
Yeah, so that's a great point. I think everyone expects Oshkosh's program to be back on the rise, but they were not the best last year for sure. And then the final option here was Nebraska Wesleyan, who is number 14 against UW La Crosse in a game that's going to be at Eau Claire, so that's a neutral site game. La Crosse did get some votes. I think they had maybe 3 poll points last year, or in this preseason poll this year. Nebraska Wesleyan up at number 14, so this is maybe a candidate for upset watch type of a thing. Again, I think La Crosse is going to be fine. They're a team I considered in my top 25, so maybe it's not super upsetty. If an ARC team in a WIAC plays, like in general, you're not like surprised if a WIAC can beat an ARC or vice versa. So kind of none of these games seem like our classic type of upset names type of thing. But I think those other 3, eliminating the Babson NYU games, are ranked versus unranked, either home games for the ranked or neutral court that could be upsettable, I think.
Yeah, so again, anyone who's followed the upset watch kind of had an uncanny ability to predict or call upset games. Taking a different approach here, Matt, just so that we can feel good about having some games to talk about rather than trying to force an upset pick or something like that. Just framing it as some of the really good ranked versus unranked games to take a look at, because sometimes those can be the sneaky good games. It's easy to look at, oh, this is a game between top 10 opponents. And sometimes you might write off a game between a top 25 team and someone who's unranked. So, we had our top 50 games of November to watch. So each week, this will give a little bit of a slate of maybe some of the sneaky good games to keep an eye on for that week.
For sure.
All right, Matt, one more typical segment for us is the mailbag. The mailbag is back. If you have a mailbag item that you would like for us to address, you can leave a message on our YouTube video for this episode. You can reach out to us via social media or any other ways to get a hold of us. Matt, Tom Snyder wants to know, now that Pool C selections will be based on NPI rather than regional rankings, how will the NCAA committee ensure teams selected meet the 500-mile geographic requirement?
Yeah, so interesting question here, but I think we need to clarify first that the 500-mile geographic requirement is not part of the selection criteria. We see teams bracketed as much as reasonable, as feasible, within 500 miles because the NCAA will bus teams that can be within 500 miles to their tournament opponents. We're talking NCAA tournament here. And over 500 miles, they will pay to fly teams, which is much more expensive. So there's a general guideline that bracketing will stay within 500 miles whenever feasible to do so. That, though, is not and has never been part of the selection criteria. So we're not ever excluding or including teams into the tournament field because they fit more naturally into geography. So from that standpoint, NPI will be no different than previously in that we're going to select our field first, and then we're going to clump teams kind of by seeding and geography and try to balance those two things at once. So the 500-mile rule was never a tournament selection criterion, and it will not
consideration
be, or consideration, right?
Yeah.
And will not be in the future as well. Now, not specifically addressed in the question here, but something that we will see in fall sports and in all sports this year for the first time. The top 8 seeds by NPI, so NPI's number 1 through 8 at the end of the year, will be guaranteed kind of top 8 positions in the bracket. So NPI's 1 through 4 will be your 4 quadrant number 1 seeds, if you want to think about that in the Division 1 sense. And NPI's 5 through 8 will be your number 2 seeds in some order or organization, and that will not factor in any geographic requirement or consideration. So you could have all teams from Wisconsin 1 through 8 if that's how things broke, and they're going to deal with that in bracketing. Or you could have all teams from the Northeast 1 through 8, and you'll have to deal with that from bracketing. So we're going to see some differences in geography and bracketing. We'll have to see how that comes into play. But again, to clarify, not ever considering geography when we're selecting or including or excluding teams from a tournament field.
And the only thing maybe to clarify in that discussion about the top 8 is that geography will be considered when placing 2 seeds with 1 seeds, right? So that 1 through 4 will be in opposite quadrants, but that doesn't mean that 1 will get paired in that quadrant with 8. There will be some geographic consideration.
Yes.
Or at least we expect there to be some geographic consideration where maybe that 1 is paired with the 6.
Right.
If that's what works out for maintaining the 500-mile rule.
And then one additional caveat is I also don't believe it guarantees hosting at all. You're a top 8. You like I said, if they're all in Wisconsin, you'll get the seeded matchup that you deserve, but that might be pulled further east to try to get teams from, maybe somewhere in Michigan so that Ohio and Indiana teams can also get to the same location because you have to make a bracket. So it's the seeds that are being protected, the matchups that are being protected. It's not necessarily hosting. Hosting rights is not a thing based on your seeding. It's going to be a consideration, but it's not going to be guaranteed.
Correct. So you could still have the situation where, you have Platteville, Case Western, and Trine is a convenient spot in the middle where everyone can get, and so Trine gets to be the host instead of Case Western Reserve.
Exactly. Yep. That could happen again. Yep.
And that wraps up with the show, Matt. We're on the move this weekend. We talked about the great event taking place at Illinois Wesleyan. We will be there. The D3 Datacast bus will be pulling into the Bloomington, Normal, Illinois area, and we're looking forward to it.
Yeah, be on the lookout for the bus. If you see the D3 Datacast bus either going past your town on our way or pulling into the Shirk Center there, give us a wave. Do the old blow your horn truck thing, and we'll make sure we're shouting you out there.
All right, have a great season, whether you're playing, coaching, watching from home, watching from the stands. Have a great season, and good job, team.
Great job, team.